Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Ponick, and I'm an Education USA advisor here at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And as you might be able to tell from my accents, I am not originally from the UK, but I am from Chicago in the US, where I completed both my undergraduate degree and my master's degree. And I've been living in London now for the past 7 years and working at Fulbright for almost 5 years now. And I am delighted to be here with you this evening to present this evening's webinar. So the first thing that I'd like to say to you today is that this session will be recorded. And so if you've registered for this webinar, then we'll be sending out the recording of the webinar to all of you. So if there's anything that you miss, or if you end up having to drop off early, then please rest assured that you will be sent the link to the recording. And this session is going to include an overview of choosing, funding, and applying for US study at the postgraduate level in the US. And at the end, we will have time for a Q&A. And so we do ask that you hold your questions until the end, and then I will let you know when you can go ahead and put those questions in the Q&A box at the end. So just to tell you a little bit more about who we are. So we are the US-UK Fulbright Commission, and we were established more than 70 years ago in the aftermath of World War II by a man named Senator Fulbright. And Senator Fulbright himself actually studied in the UK as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And he thought that the best way to avoid a third world war would be to encourage cultural and educational exchange. So we were born from that, and we are a not-for-profit organization that's jointly funded by the US and UK government to promote peace and cultural understanding through educational exchange. And so how exactly do we do that? So one way that we do that is by offering scholarships for postgraduate study and research in the US and the UK. And then we also offer an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying for US universities. And this advisory service is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And our aim at Education USA is to offer free, unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we're actually also the only official source of US study here in the UK. And so to get started, I want to start by talking a little bit about why study in the US and why so many students choose to go to the US for their studies each year. And as you can see on this screen, there are a number of reasons that students choose to do so. And so I'll go through a few of them. So the first is actually just the wide range of choices that are available. There's over 1,700 universities offering postgraduate degrees in the US as compared to about 120 here in the UK. There's also a lot of variety in institutions and also amongst academic departments. Going to the US also offers the opportunity to internationalize your CV. Employers cite cross-cultural experience as an attractive quality when hiring their employees. And it's also helpful to have diverse experiences and to demonstrate the independence that's necessary to study abroad. It also gives you the chance to engage in global networking. It's an unparalleled opportunity to create global networks, not only with American faculty and institutions, but with the diverse colleagues that make up many US institutions. You also gain practical experience. There's multiple opportunities for hands-on research, internships, and teaching opportunities. You also have the chance to expand your horizons because living and studying in another country expands your worldview and may expand the opportunities available to you in the future. And lastly, this might surprise some of you, but a final top reason to study in the US is actually funding opportunities. There are a lot of funding schemes and scholarships available at the postgraduate level, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. And before I move on, I just want to talk about some of the key differences in postgraduate study between the US and the UK. So in the US, we usually have longer programs. So master's programs are typically 2 years, although there are some 1-year programs available. And PhD programs tend to be about 4 to 6 years, though this may be less or more depending on the program and the department. A PhD tends to include a master's integrated into it, which means that you would typically do coursework for the first year or two. And if you do already have a master's, then you can use that time to kind of sharpen skills, gain more experience teaching or doing research. It's typically not an optional component of the degree. They don't really have pure research degrees. Programs will include coursework even at the postgraduate level. There are no set fees or standard application deadlines, and there's a lot of variance by university and department. And typically postgraduate programs are organized by the department rather than by a supervisor. You don't need to know your supervisor beforehand, especially since some programs are more interdisciplinary, which means you might have multiple supervisors or even a committee. You also don't necessarily need to have an in-depth research proposal. They may instead expect you to figure this out throughout the program. And then something else to be aware of is that both law and medicine are studied at the postgraduate level in the US, as opposed to in the UK, where you can study it at the undergraduate level. And now I want to quickly go through a timeline of applying to US universities. So we recommend beginning to research programs about 12 to 18 months before enrollments. And then about 10 to 12 months, you'll probably, before enrollments, you would finalize the selection of where you'll be applying. And around the same time, you'll probably also be taking any required admissions exams and beginning your applications. And then about 8 to 10 months before you enroll, you'll put together an application and submit it according to the deadlines. And then around 4 to 7 months before, in the spring, you can, in the spring before you enroll, you can expect to hear back from universities where you applied to hear about those admissions decisions. And then based off of where you were accepted, you'll notify universities of your decision, and about 1 to 3 months before you'll apply for your visa and enroll. And then we have lots of information on our website to help with your pre-departure, including travel advice, living arrangements, campus life, etc. And then you would typically start at around mid-August to early September, actually start your degree, which I know is slightly earlier than it would be here in the UK. So now I want to talk a little bit about choosing a program. So there's over 1,700 institutions offering postgraduate programs. So that's a lot of options, and each institution and department is going to be different. So how exactly do you go about narrowing down where you want to actually apply? And a term that you'll hear us focus on a lot here at the Fulbright Commission is this idea of fit. And what this means is that we want students to find a program that's really going to be the best fit for you and your personal and your academic interests. And this is the first step in the choosing process. It means that you're going to locate what factors are important to you. And this means that you're not just looking at universities that you've heard of straight away, or maybe ones that you've seen mentioned in movies or in television programs, or ones that have the highest rankings, but you're actually thinking about what factors are important to you and what institution is going to be the best fit for you and your education. So when you're thinking about that fit, there's a number of different factors that you'll want to consider. So these are some examples of factors that you might wish to consider, among many others. One is the type of institution. For instance, would you rather be at a public or a private university? You'll also want to consider the program type. At the postgraduate level, this is arguably more important than the institution itself. You'll want to consider your career goals, qualifications, and any concentrations you might be interested in. Do you want to be in a program with funded internship opportunities, programs where you can get grant writing experience, that kind of thing? You'll also want to think about the academic department, because choosing the right department is almost as important as choosing the right university at the postgraduate level. It's going to influence so much of your experience in the US. At the postgraduate level, academic departments generally handle admissions, design the course structure for students, and monitor a student's progression through the program. So it's really essential to research the department to find the right academic home for you. And departments can vary drastically in areas of faculty expertise, elective courses, concentrations, whether they're tightly focused or more interdisciplinary, in their size and atmosphere, and as well as opportunities for teaching, research, conference attendance, and internships. You'll also want to think about location. The US is a massive country spanning many different geographic zones. Do you want to be somewhere more urban or somewhere more rural? What's the climate like where you want to go? Is there access to transportation options? So will you need a car, or will you be able to take public transport? You'll also want to think about if there's centers of excellence in your fields. So for instance, if you're interested in political science, you might be thinking about Washington, DC. If you're interested in finance, you might be thinking about New York. You'll also want to think about the extracurricular opportunities that might be available. And lastly, finances. And we'll talk more in depth about funding later in the webinar, but if funding is important to you, then this needs to be part of your choosing process right from the beginning. Oftentimes funding, especially funding from universities, is awarded and applied for alongside the application process. So you don't only just want to start thinking about it after you've applied and been accepted, because at that point it might already be too late, and we wouldn't want for you to be disappointed later down the line. So with that in mind, and so many different factors to consider, how might you go about narrowing down your options? And our website has a page on choosing a university, which includes a list of links to helpful search engines such as Peterson's and gradschools.com. You can also use previous professors to see whether they have any advice or opinions on schools that could be a good fit for you. You may also wish to speak with professionals or colleagues in your field to see if they know of schools in your discipline. You can also think through the work of scholars that you've previously read. Is there anyone that you've identified as doing the kind of research that you would like to do? Where are they teaching? What are their colleagues working on? And you're going to want to kind of narrow down your choice of universities to about 10 or so institutions. So this is Peterson's. This is one of the search engines that's linked on our website. And it can be a helpful tool in deciding and ranking what factors are important to you in choosing the university. And so for an example here, we'll use this tool to look for graduate level schools and programs in a particular field. In this case, we'll be looking at programs in anthropology. And as you can see here, the search engine pulls up the results of different universities with departments or programs in anthropology. And on the left sidebar, you can select a variety of different factors like location, tuition fees, school size to narrow down the list further. And once you narrow your choice to about 10 universities of interest, you'll want to research them further on the university website and reach out to them directly, with the ultimate goal of selecting about 4 to 6 institutions where you'll actually submit an application. And when you go to those university websites, you can find more information on faculty. Some of them even might list the CVs of their faculty, their research interests, and a list of their publications. They might even provide contact information for specific professors to reach out to. So find out if they're still working on something that interests you. Another thing that you could do is reach out to current grad students. By reaching out to current students, you might be able to gain valuable insight into their experience as a graduate student at that particular university. You can ask them what kinds of projects they're working on, how close the relationships are between professors and graduate students, how close they are with their supervisors. You can ask about the campus culture. You can even ask more broad questions like how to find a good apartment, what the cost of living is like there. And departments can usually put you in touch by email with a current student, and this could be a good way to determine what it's like to study there. So that's an overview of some of the main reasons why you might want to study in the US, and also a guide to the choosing process and how to determine your fit at particular universities and programs. And doing that in-depth research in the choosing process is so important. When you get familiar with the programs you're looking at, you can really then put together the most competitive application possible for them. And the more competitive your application, the better your chances are of securing funding. So the more time that you spend in the research process, the more benefit it will bring you in the application process. And with that in mind, now I'm going to talk a little bit more about completing an application and how to go about doing that. So first and foremost, US universities are looking for your academic achievement. And that's going to be measured by your undergraduate degree, or if applicable to you, your postgraduate degree, as well as any admissions test scores, if that's something that's required. Most universities are going to want to see at least a 2.2 on a bachelor's degree, although you can contact individual departments or programs about whether your qualifications are sufficient to be considered for admissions. They won't necessarily have strict entry requirements, but they should be able to give you an approximate idea of whether your academic profile is roughly in line with their usual admitted students. Also, important parts of the application, you're going to want to include your reasons for pursuing a postgraduate degree at their institution, how it helps towards your goals, as well as any relevant work experience or coursework and any extracurricular involvement. US universities want to see a pattern of relevant work and study experience that lay a strong academic and practical foundation for your studies, as well as your ability and interest in being involved both in and outside of the classroom. US campuses are very lively places, and so they want to see the personality of their applicants coming out. They might also want to know why you want to study in the US specifically. So there is no standard process for applications. It will vary by university, and each university will set its own deadlines and application requirements. That being said, most applications will follow a similar format, and you'll be able to reuse or adapt the materials that you prepare for each. So most applications are going to include an application form with your basic information. They may ask for admissions test scores, which will be sent to the university by the organization that administered the test. They will likely ask for a transcript, which will be a listing of your academic marks. And you can usually ask your department, university, or registrar's office for a transcript. They'll also likely ask for a personal statement that describes your academic interests, your professional and personal goals and relevant experience. And this will be an opportunity to put forth any personal history or context and sell yourself to the program. They're likely to ask for 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And the university may provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. So for example, one letter might come from an academic or from a professional referee. You'll want to choose someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom. They might ask for a CV or a resume that lists your professional and extracurricular accomplishments. An interview may be required for some students, especially if applying for an MBA or occasionally for research degrees too, depending on the program. If you're a student in the arts, you might be asked to do an audition or to submit a portfolio. Research-focused degrees, students applying for a research-focused degree might be asked to submit a writing sample. And finally, there will be an application fee for each application, typically between $50 and $100 per application. And one thing that you'll want to think about when you're choosing universities is how your academic profile compares to other applicants. How do universities measure you up as a potential colleague or student? So you'll want to consider your grades, your UK qualifications, your test scores if they require a US admissions exam. You'll think about your research, so maybe your dissertation as part of your undergraduate degree. Think about your work experience. So for some programs such as an MBA, this is very important. For other programs, it might not be as important. We also have something called the X factor, not the television show, but instead anything that makes you stand out to determine where you will likely be accepted or competitive for funding. So for instance, if you are applying as a student from the UK, you might want to apply to a university that doesn't get many British applicants, because that's really going to make your application stand out and be something that's really unique. Also, as an international student, maybe you've had a really unique undergraduate program, and you can make a strong case as to why you would bring something unique to their university and to their campus. US universities like to have an interesting mix of ideas and people on their program. So you'll want to think about if there's anything that's unique to you that you think you can bring to the university. So now to talk a little bit more in depth about admissions exams. So admissions tests act as a method of evaluation due to a lack of national curriculum in the US. So it kind of helps level the playing field a little. And you'll want to ensure that you take the appropriate test. And in fact, you'll want to confirm that you need to take a test at all, because not all programs will require them. So you'll need to consult the website of each university to which you plan to apply. And you'll want to make sure that you pay close attention to the university's application deadline so that you can plan your exam schedule accordingly. And we're often asked how important standardized tests are in admissions decisions. And really, it depends. Some universities may not require them at all, but for others, it might factor into their decision, but they're more interested in your personal statement and your transcript. Some might say that they're interested in the analytical writing and verbal reasoning scores more than how you did on the quantitative reasoning section. It kind of just depends. And if you'd like, you can always ask a university how much weight the exam is given when you're doing your research process. And here on the screen, you'll see some examples of different admissions exams that are used for applying to US postgraduate programs. So the GRE is the graduate record exam, and that measures your verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills. And the GRE is used for quite a few master's programs, most master's programs. You may have also heard of the GMAT, which is used for MBA programs and some business programs. There's also something called the LSAT, which is used for JD programs and law, although it's not required for LLM law programs, which only require a first degree in law. There's also the MCAT for MD programs for medical admissions. And something that you might want to be aware of with all of these exams is that they're quite different to what you might be used to in the UK. They tend to be multiple choice. They tend to have a strict time limit. So what you'll want to do is make sure that you properly prepare for the exam. There are free prep materials online, as well as the option to buy study guides. You'll probably want to take some mock exams under timed test conditions so that you get used to having to take the exam under those conditions. And you'll also want to make sure that you register early for exams and leave yourself the option of retaking the exam if necessary. And just a note here on COVID is that not all universities might be requiring exams in this upcoming admissions year because of COVID. And so it's worth kind of checking to see if they require them. But if they do require them, know that the exam companies have been trying to make the exams as accessible as possible and as safe as possible so that students who do need to take those exams are able to do so. And now to talk a little bit more in depth about the personal statement. So this is actually one of the most important parts of the application. It's not like your UCAS personal statement, but rather it's an opportunity to showcase what you can bring. Some universities might ask for an essay instead of a statement. Others may ask you to address something specific. So just make sure that you check the requirements carefully. But generally, a personal statement is going to help reveal your character, motivation, future goals, and your interest in your particular university, program, or field. And since there's really no set structure for writing a personal statement, you do have the opportunity to be creative and make yourself stand out. So some students choose to start with a quote or anecdote describing how they became interested in their field of study. Others use a central theme to link and describe their experiences and future plans for their studies and career. And something to keep in mind is that it's not an in-depth research proposal. Some universities might ask for that separately to outline your research interests and future plans. And you won't necessarily need to know exactly what you want to research. This could be something that you find out in the program. If they do ask for a research statement, then that will give you the opportunity to showcase your passion for the field, familiarity with relevant literature, key concepts, methodologies, and etc. And then I also like to talk a little bit more about letters of recommendation. So as I said, you'll likely be required to gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And you'll want to make sure that you ask a variety of people who know you well. The university may provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. So for example, they might ask for 1 letter from an academic, 1 from a professional referee. If you do have multiple academic referees to choose from, you'll want to choose someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom. You'll also want to choose referees that will complement your application package as well as each other so that you get a good balance of classroom, professional, research, and extracurricular. You may wish to meet with your referee to discuss the letter. You could, if you'd like, if it would be helpful, give them a copy of your application, your transcript, or your CV. You'll probably want to tell them your reasons for doing a postgrad degree in the US or in your chosen field, why you're interested in the particular universities you selected, and what your future goals are. And you'll want to make sure that the referee is aware of the deadlines and any paperwork that they need to complete. And these letters are really a marketing tool for you as an applicant. You can make suggestions for the contents of the letter, but it is important that you don't see the letter before it gets sent off to the university, because this makes the letter not as kind of valid in the university's eyes. They want to know that it's more trusted if it's just been sent off by the referee without you seeing it. That being said, you can discuss the things that you want your referee to mention in the letter. So you might want them to mention your ability to succeed at the postgraduate level, any observations about your performance, your ability to positively contribute, any leadership abilities, and anything about your character, as well as your passion for your subject of choice. And above all, really, you want to encourage your referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. As you might imagine, American referees tend to write in a really enthusiastic tone. They use really positive and descriptive language to discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom. And so bear in mind that what's going to be written about your American counterparts. And prepare your UK referees to write their letters in a way that's going to be comparable to that. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about funding your studies. And as you might imagine, this is one of the top things that we get asked about. And a common misconception is that the US is always more expensive. And actually, there is a significant amount of funding available at the postgraduate level, particularly if you're willing to be flexible and go into the process with an open mind. So I'm going to talk to you now about how to do that. So there's 4 main types of funding for study in the US. The first is actually just personal and family funds. There is very much a culture in the US of saving and paying for university in a way that doesn't exist in the loan-based system here in the UK. There is an expectation that you and your families make a contribution to your studies. So that is a big source of funding in the US. That being said, US universities are actually the best source for funding themselves. So the best resource for funding will likely be a US university itself. And there's 2 most common types of university-based funding at the postgrad level. One is through fellowships, which are outright grants to allow a recipient to focus solely on their own work. And the other one is assistantships, which are offered in return for services provided to the department, either teaching, research, lab supervision, or working in a campus office in exchange for fee waivers, health insurance, and a stipend. Now, the terms of an assistantship will vary dramatically between universities and departments, and it does depend on available grants and the field and the departments. So it is always important to ask the department or program about this kind of funding when you're choosing where to apply. More funding does generally tend to be available for PhDs and students in a research-focused master's than for professional degree students. And it does also vary by subject area. So the sciences do tend to receive more funding than programs in the humanities. Assistantships are renewable from year to year if the student maintains specified academic standards. And you'll want to make sure that you check with multiple offices about funding opportunities and application. You want to check with departments themselves, the graduate school, if the university has an overarching graduate school, as well as the financial aid office. Another main source of funding are external funding bodies, and these are niche scholarships. And there are institutions that are separate to the universities, such as companies, charities, and foundations that offer these types of scholarships. And lastly, as kind of a last resort, there are loans. Now, most US lenders will require a US citizen to co-sign on the loan. And so therefore, most UK citizens that choose to take out a loan take out private loans from a UK bank. However, we kind of say to be very, very cautious about this, that you'd want to make sure that you examine the terms and interest rates closely if this is something that you decide to do, because the interest rates can be very high. And sometimes the terms might require that you start paying back that loan before you've even completed your degree, before you're even able to be earning. And so you want to be really cautious and careful about that. If you are an American or dual US-UK citizen, you could take out a loan from a US lender and apply for US federal loans through what's called FAFSA. So it's likely that you might use multiple of these different sources to fund your studies. And as you can see here, university and external funding are the preferred options since they don't have to be paid back. So now I want to talk a little bit about a funding strategy. You may wish to consider a funding strategy to try and lower costs and to manage expenses. You might think of 3 different approaches. So the first, you could reduce the costs of living. So it's going to be cheaper to live in a rural versus an urban area. So as you might imagine, it's more expensive to live in London than it is to live in Lancaster. just as it's going to be more expensive to live in New York City or Boston than it is to be in somewhere more rural, like in Kansas, for instance. You could also look to lower tuition costs. So public universities, which are state-funded universities, generally have lower costs than private universities. That being said, private universities might have more funding available, and funding is going to vary by department within each university. So that's just something to keep in mind. And as we've already discussed, you could look for university funding. And in addition to the ways that we've already discussed, you might even think about seeking funding outside of your program at the university. So, especially if what you're studying is interdisciplinary. So for example, if you are an architecture student in the School of Architecture, but you have an interest in environmental architecture and making buildings more green, maybe you can go to the environmental sciences department and see if they are able to provide funding. So you can get creative with how you can find different sources of funding. And just a word of caution that you might not necessarily be able to use all of these strategies in one go. As I mentioned, you might find that universities with lower tuition have fewer funding opportunities from the university. So just be aware of the different factors that are at play. And here's just an example. So Boston University versus UMass. So Boston University's cost of attendance within the Department of Education and Human Development is over 79,000 US dollars with tuition, room and board, and other fees. Compare that to an MA at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where tuition and off-campus finances would be about 25,000 US dollars less. Now, both of these universities are in Boston, and they're in the same city, but they have a great variance in tuition and fees. Some universities that are close by each other like this might actually have relationships with each other, where you might even be able to take classes at Boston University while at UMass. So all of these different things are things that you should keep in mind when you're doing your research and when you're doing your choosing. So now I'd like to take a little look at a few examples of how to identify these funding opportunities. So for university funding, the best resource is going to be the university website. And as I said, you'll want to check the department page, the graduate school page, and the financial aid pages. Check all three in case not all the funding opportunities are advertised centrally. See what they say. Do they have much funding available? Universities will generally try to give you an accurate but conservative measure of how much funding they offer. And if this information isn't available online, it might suggest that they can't offer a lot of financial support. But it is worth getting in touch with the departmental administrator or the director to inquire. You'll want to think about whether you're competitive for funding at that particular institution. You can even ask current students how competitive funding really is, what their assistantship involves, what the work-life balance is, get the inside scoop. You can find out how many assistantships there are available. Are they full or partial? And if possible, find out what basis they award assistantships. Is it based on your GRE score, or is it more on the basis of your academics or prior experience? You'll also want to find out if there's extra requirements that you need to fulfill to be considered for an assistantship. You may be automatically considered, but in some cases, applicants may need to submit an additional essay or resume. So now we're going to see an example of what you can look out for. So this is the website of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is the top public research university. And you'll see here that we've highlighted some key points in their section about fellowships and assistantships and how to identify when a university has funding available. And as you can see, most universities who are generous with funding will make it quite obvious on their websites. So in the Department of Political Science, they note that most students in their department are supported by fellowships and assistantships. They also explain that duties typically range from 10 to 15 hours per week, and they list the type of duties that you can expect. You'll also see that they mention eligibility for a variety of fellowships. And they also note that Chapel Hill has a low cost of living. So you can see here that we've got 2 points from the funding strategy, the university funding and the lower cost of living. And this is an example of a scholarship from an external funding body. So the Fulbright Commission, as I mentioned earlier, is funded by UK and US governments with a mission of promoting mutual understanding through educational exchange. And so funding is available for UK students to study and conduct research in the US and vice versa at the postgraduate level. So these are the Fulbright Awards. And the number of awards fluctuate each year, with the deadline in early November for enrollment the following academic year. So yes, you're applying by November before you've actually been officially accepted at a US university. And the variety of awards available, there are a variety of awards available, and some are for the first year only, and other awards are fully funded. So you'll kind of want to check the website and get more details from that. Some other resources for exploring external funding scholarships are listed on our website's postgraduate guide. And we've got online scholarship searches that you can use to help you narrow down the thousands of scholarships available based on things like your country of origin, your fields, and they will allow you to find out more information about the eligibility. You'll then want to refer to the funding body's website for information about the application process and their deadlines. So lastly, just some funding tips. So applying for funding often happens simultaneous to the admissions process. So you'll want to begin the search for funding early. You'll want to make sure that you're willing to put in the time and effort to seek out and apply for funding opportunities. Scholarships will likely not find you. You'll need to investigate university funding and take the time to search for the often niche external scholarships. And you should be flexible in choosing universities. If it's essential for you to receive funding to complete postgraduate study, you'll want to choose departments with a lot of funding available, or departments where you're a really competitive and top student. You can often find exam scores and grades of last year's admitted students on the university's website so that you can do this. And as I've said several times, for university funding, the best resource is the university website itself. And remember to check those three places: the department page, the graduate school page, and the financial aid pages, in case not all the funding opportunities are advertised centrally. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can typically work on campus for up to 20 hours a week during term time and 40 hours per week during holidays, although these expected earnings can't be calculated for visa purposes when you're showing your proof of funds. So now that I've talked through the kind of process of choosing, applying, and funding your studies in the US, I want to highlight some ways that we can help. So first and foremost, if you haven't already, highly recommend that you check out our website for advice and guides and events. If you go to this Going to the USA section here, we've got a postgraduate guide with details on choosing, funding, and applying. So everything that we've talked about now this evening, but in much more written detail with lots of links and website searches and resources that you can use. Also in this Going to the USA section, you'll find the Fulbright Award section, which will tell you more about the different awards that are available, their benefits, selection criteria, and the application procedures. We also have an advising line. So we take questions by phone, by email, and we actually now offer video appointments as well through Zoom. Our phone line is open on a Tuesday and Thursday afternoon from 1:30 to 4:30. We check our advising email inbox Monday through Friday when we're in the office. And then we also have, as I said, an availability to book a video appointment with an advisor on our website if that's something that you're interested in. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions as you go along in the process. We also host and attend various events like this one throughout the year. At the moment, we are doing all of that virtually, although we do hope to be doing that in person again soon. And so if when you registered for this webinar this evening, you asked to be signed up to our mailing list, then we will be sending you information about those events. If you didn't ask to be signed up to our mailing list and now you've decided that you want to, you can go ahead and email us and ask us to sign you up, and we can do that. So with that, that brings us to the Q&A part of the session. And so if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and pop those into the Q&A box. And I would ask that you just ask general questions that would be kind of relevant for everybody in the audience. And then if you do have any kind of really specific or niche questions, that you can reach out to us separately to kind of ask for advice on that. And I'm mindful that some of you might not be able to stay for this whole Q&A part of the evening. And so if you do need to step out, thank you for tuning in this evening, and know that the recording of this session will be sent out to you. And for those of you that do have questions, go ahead and post those in the Q&A box now. All right, so I'll just give you a moment to get some of those questions in. All right, so some universities were required that the student be native or have been a citizen to apply to a medical program. Is this true? How can I apply if I'm an international citizen? And is it possible to apply as an international student to a medical program? So that's a really good question. And you are right in that not all US universities do allow international students to apply to their programs. And it's a very small number of international citizens that are accepted into medical programs in the US each year. And for that reason, typically students in the UK that are interested in pursuing a medical degree, we do usually encourage them to do their medical degree here in the UK and maybe pursue some kind of research in the US rather than pursuing a medical degree in the US. As I said, very few universities even accept international students, and the ones that do, the availability of funding is extremely limited, unfortunately. And so that is one of the few cases where that is something that you're interested in. We do typically recommend that you stay here in the UK and maybe go to the US to complete some research. All right, another question. I am a master's graduate who has made contact with a professor who leads a cancer research lab at the Massachusetts General Hospital in the US. Can I apply to Fulbright via the all disciplines independent research route, even though I won't be studying at or connected to a university institution? And so this will probably be a common refrain that you hear me say if you are asking a specific question about our Fulbright Awards. So for our Fulbright Awards, if you have any kind of really specific questions like this one, you're going to want to reach out to the Fulbright Awards team. And so I will pop their email into the chat box for you. So that's programs@fulbright.org.uk. And they're going to be the ones that are kind of best placed to answer any of those specific questions about the awards. So apologies that I'm not able to give you more of an answer there. The next question, is it easier to get funding scholarships to double programs than only one? In this case, MD, PhD than MD, would you recommend to be considered? And so I think I've already talked a little bit about the MD. And so I think if you are looking for funding in the US, you're probably going to want to be looking more at a PhD program as opposed to an MD program. You'll have a higher chance of funding with that. So this next question, I applied to a US PhD program last year and got on the alternate waiting list, but didn't make the final cut. I'm reapplying this year and wondered if you had any recommendations in terms of whether I need to represent developments in progress in any particular way, whether I highlight how this shows commitment or allows that to be implicit in the fact that I am reapplying, etc. I mean, I think absolutely, if you're reapplying to the program again, you are going to want to show any development or progress that you have made, and anything that you have been doing with your time in this past year. I'm not sure if you were able to get any kind of feedback into why you didn't make the final cut, if it was just a matter of funding. You may also wish to just expand your applications to ensure that you're applying to a variety of different options, so that if this option doesn't work out for you this year in the way that you hope it would when you reapply, that you have other options on the table. So you may just also wish to consider applying to some other institutions alongside that as well. So this question is, aside from financial considerations, what are some of the pros and cons of public versus private universities? And so it's a good question. There are really the main difference in public and versus private universities is the funding aspect, and is that public universities do receive funding from the state in which they are located. Public universities on the whole tend to be larger universities. There are, of course, large private universities as well, but you will find oftentimes that public universities do, in terms of student population, tend to be large institutions, whereas private universities have a range of different sizes. They'll have large private institutions, they'll have small, medium sized. So that's something else to consider. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's worth mentioning. I mean, the reality is that each university in the US is very just different. You're going to get a different feel. Every campus is going to have its own campus culture, no matter where you are. And so when you're doing your research, you're going to want to maybe sit in on some info sessions for a variety of different universities. And it might be that you sit in on a couple of public universities, sit in on a couple private universities, and you can start to see if in the field that you're hoping to study, if you're noticing any particular differences in something that appeals to you more or appeals to you less. And that could be a way to kind of figure out where it is that you want to apply. And so a couple of questions about the Postgrad Award. So one is, how many applications are received on average per cycle for the All Disciplines Award, and what is a typical acceptance rate? So if you go on the website, there is a part on the website where you can see how many applications are received each year. If you have any trouble finding that, you can email the programs team at programs@fulbright.org.uk, and they can tell you exactly where to find that, as well as details on what percentage, like how many awards are given each year and how many people apply. So that information is available. And also, does Fulbright Award scholarships or must we look externally too? So the Fulbright Awards are just one type of scholarship. And so they are an example of an external scholarship that is available to you. And so here at Fulbright, we've got the Education USA team that I am a part of, and we are all about helping you apply to postgraduate study in the US. And then we have the awards team that works on this Fulbright Awards. And so if you decide to apply for a Fulbright Award in order to fund your studies, you would still need to apply to a US university alongside that and receive an acceptance to a US university. And so we're here to help you and my team apply to the US university, get accepted to a US university, and then my colleagues in the awards team can help you with your application to a Fulbright Award that you wish to apply for in terms of finding funding. There are also other external scholarships. The Fulbright Awards are just one type of external funding body. And so there are other ones that are available. And if you go to our website, then you can see different ones that are available to you, and use some of those search engines to search for other tools. So this next question is, how are master's students typically assessed in the US? And where might I find assessment information for each module on a US grad school website? So that's a really good question. And the answer is going to be that it depends. And so in terms of the assessment information on a grad school website, I'm actually not certain if that information will be available on the website at all or not. You can have a little look around and see if it is. And if it's not, then it could be that you just reach out to an administrator at the university and ask for that information. You know, you will, it's going to depend on your program. It is likely that you'll have some type of research dissertation of some sort that will be included in your assessments, but you may also have assessments along the way, and so that will kind of make up your overall grade. And you know, it's likely that you'll receive grades in your classes all the way along as well, as opposed to kind of an overall classification at the end. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Do universities in the US have early decision options for postgraduate applications? And so I don't believe that the early decision exists in the same way for postgrad as it does for undergrad. And so it does. I don't think it really exists in quite the same way. I think there is just, it might be that some universities have kind of a strict deadline, whereas other universities might have rolling admissions where they admit as students go along. But there doesn't really, early decision doesn't seem to exist in the same way. Are there ever any instances of application fee waivers? Is this a thing in the US? And this does exist at the undergraduate level. I don't think that this exists at the postgraduate level in the same way. You can check with universities to be certain, but my understanding is that it doesn't exist at the postgraduate level in the same way as it does at the undergraduate level. Do you know of any websites where current and ex-students talk about graduate level study and their personal experiences of their courses, kind of like a US graduate equivalent of the student room, if there is one? And so that's a good question. And I'm sure that those websites exist. As an Education USA representative, there isn't necessarily an official one that we would recommend. If you do some Googling search, you might find some, but just remembering that when you're looking at those types of websites, you are tending to get kind of very polarized views. So people who feel very strongly one way or the other way. And so your best bet might, if you're interested in hearing a student's experience, is that you're probably going to want to reach out to the university itself and see if they can put you in touch with a current student who will be able to give you more information. So would a student be disadvantaged applying directly after a UK law degree to do an LLM, not having any work experience and being younger than the cohort? So that's a good question. And as you may have noticed with a lot of these answers, the answer is that it depends. Some LLM programs might be very happy for you to apply, immediately after completing that UK law degree. And other programs are going to want to see some work experience before you apply. And so you'll have to do your research and see. One thing that I will say is if you are interested in an LLM, is that we do typically host an LLM fair in the autumn. And so you'll want to make sure that you kind of keep an eye out on our website, because we will be having a fair later this autumn and more information for students who are interested in an LLM kind of November time. So do keep an eye out for more information about that. And then another couple of questions about the Fulbright Award. How does the Fulbright funding work in terms of applying before being accepted by universities? If you were accepted for a Fulbright Award and then rejected from the university later, and vice versa. And will applying to a 2-year program affect the chances of getting a Fulbright Award? I know the funding is only offered for the first year, but I wondered if preference was given to students on single-year courses. So again, you'll want to check in with the programs team, but I can answer a little bit of these questions for you. And so, yes, you do need to be accepted at, if you're, I believe that typically if a student is given a Fulbright Award, they tend to be also of such a quality that they are being accepted at their chosen university. But if you were not accepted at the university, then you would need to get in touch with the team, the Fulbright Awards team, and kind of discuss next steps. And that's a question that you can ask them now if that's something that you want to know more information on. And also, in terms of the question if applying to a 2-year program affects the chance of getting a Fulbright Award, no, it won't. And when you say the funding is only offered for the first year, that is the case for the All Disciplines Award, but there are a variety of different awards available, and some of the awards are fully funded awards. So it is something to kind of keep in mind when you're doing your research of which award to apply for, to see if there might be an award that's relevant to what you are interested in studying that could kind of cover beyond that first year of funding. So this person has asked, can you expand on what is meant by preparation for study in the US and how that would be different from preparing to study in the UK? Could you give some examples of how students could do so? I think, feel free to write in the box again if I don't have this right, but I'm wondering if you're talking about the admissions exams and preparing for the admissions exams, because that was where I talked about how it's different in the US than the UK. So in terms of the admissions exams, as I mentioned, they do tend to be multiple choice timed exams. And so where I think in the UK, you're kind of more used to kind of more longer essays as opposed to kind of a multiple choice exam. And so I would really recommend just preparing and studying for it by getting some resources, taking some mock exams, kind of seeing if there are certain sections that you struggle with more than others, and kind of prioritizing your focus on those sections. Sometimes, depending on the exam, they might even kind of identify what types of question types within a section that you're struggling with. And you might notice that there's specific skills that you need to revise and kind of be stronger at. And so those are some tips for how you do that. So I'm a current MA student, so won't hand in my dissertation until September 2022. I don't want to take a year out, but is it still possible to apply for a PhD study starting August, September 2022? So that is going to be a question that you're going to want to ask the institutions where you're applying. And so you'll kind of want to see if there are some institutions that you seem particularly interested in, it might be worth reaching out to those institutions and seeing what their requirements would be in terms of that, or if it's even possible to start maybe in the January term, or what their requirements would be with that. Could you please elaborate on the X factor, as well as the way in which US universities view extracurriculars? Yes, so to talk a little bit more about the X factor, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's going to be something that makes you stand out. And because you are you, you might not even realize that it's something that is unique about you. And so, because it's just who you are, but you might want to have a think about, you know, as a student applying to this US university, what might be unique about you that the other applicants who are applying might not have. So as I mentioned, one thing might be that you are coming from the UK. And so there, you know, for instance, we have a colleague at Fulbright who did her postgraduate degree in Wyoming, at an institution that doesn't normally get a lot of students from the UK coming to Wyoming. And so that was something that was really unique about her and what she was applying. It might be that as part of your undergraduate degree, you did this, really unique research that, person that you worked with at your university on had never heard of somebody being interested in this before. And it's something that's really unique and something that could be really exciting to a US university. So it's just kind of having to think about, you might even want to sit down and just take stock and think about things that you're interested in, things that make you you, and then have a think about, it might be that other applicants at a US university might not have this, and I might want to make sure that I really highlight this in my application because that could really make me stand out. Oh, pardon me. Do you know where I could find written guidance materials on writing graduate school master's personal statements? That's a really good question. And I'm wondering if there might be some information on our website about this. But if there isn't, if you have a look at our website and it's not on there, please do email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk. And I will do a little bit of research on this for you and see if there are some resources that could be helpful to you. So this person has asked, you mentioned that US PhDs tend to be longer and include an integrated master's program. If you already have a postgrad degree from the UK, would universities look at this more favorably? I think it kind of depends. I think that, which I know is an answer that you're probably hearing me say quite a lot. It is quite a common answer. I think that you will find that PhD programs probably tend to accept some students who don't have a master's and some students who do have a master's already. You can always reach out to the institution itself and see if that's something that might make you more competitive in the pool. It will definitely show that you are really interested in the field. And if you've done well in that master's program, it is evidence of, a strong academic background and that you can bring that strong academic background to their institution. So it definitely, won't hurt. Whether it makes you more competitive will probably depend on the institution and what it is that they're looking for. As I said, I would imagine that they accept students who have masters and students who don't have masters into their PhD programs. And so a few more awards questions. So what does the all-discipline scholarship mean? Is it when you can get a scholarship for any of the graduate programs a university has? And yes, I think that is what it means. You'll want to take a look at the website page to be absolutely sure, but it does mean that you can kind of go to any accredited university in the US and any program and use that scholarship there. Can Fulbright give feedback if we're unsuccessful in our application so that we can take this into account if we choose to reapply? So this is a question for the awards team. I know that they do receive many applications, so I'm not sure if they're able to offer feedback if you're unsuccessful. But you can check with them and see what they say. Generally speaking, do the postgrad awards tend to be more or less competitive most years compared with the Visiting Scholar Awards. And as you have noted, yeah, that is going to be an email query for that programs team. I think that they will be able to give you answers on that. Although, as I mentioned, there should be information available on the website of how many people apply for each award and how many people receive each award each year. So you should be able to look at that data as well. Do Ivy League schools offer anything distinctive? Is there anything distinctive about their application process? So that's a good question. So something to be aware of is that the Ivy League is actually just a sports league. They're called the Ivy League because they were a group of colleges and universities that came together to play American football hundreds of years ago, and that's why it's called the Ivy League. That they're made up of this group of schools that came together to play sports. Yes, they are, very high, well-known, reputable institutions that offer an outstanding academic experience, but they're not comparable to, say, the Russell Group in the UK in terms of they're actually just named after being a sports league. And so, what we really do encourage, if you're really interested in going to the US and the US is your final destination, is really being open-minded and really considering all your options when you're doing that choosing process of where you're going to apply. As you might imagine, the Ivy League schools are ones that a lot of people have heard of, and so they receive high numbers of applications from all over the world, including the UK. It doesn't mean that it might not be the right fit for you. It could very well be the right fit for you, and if it is, that's great. But what we don't want is somebody to apply there simply because they've heard of it, when actually there might be another institution that's actually a better fit for you that you've never heard of, that you might actually be more competitive for admission and for funding from that institution. So that's just something to keep in mind. Is in the USA, are MBA programs available to international students to receive a scholarship? And so my understanding is that there isn't as much funding available for MBA programs as there might be for other programs, other master's degrees and PhD programs. It probably does exist. It's probably just not as generous or as common as it would be for a master's degree or a PhD. Just looking through. So is there an age limit to the Fulbright Awards program? My understanding is that there is not, but you will just want to double check to be sure about that. I don't believe that there is an age limit for it. What is the main characteristic Fulbright is looking for? How do the Fulbright alumni stand out? Grades, internships, extracurricular activities, demographics. Yeah, so that's a good question. And I can answer some of that. The other thing that I should say is that our Fulbright Awards the Fulbright Awards did just open this week. And so in the coming weeks, the Fulbright Awards team is going to be hosting their own webinars. And I am sure that this is a question that they are definitely going to be answering in that, as well as all of these questions. And so if you are interested in learning more about the Fulbright Awards, you should make sure to sign up for their mailing list on our website, and they should be able to give you more information. But to answer your question right now, they're going to be looking for a student who's really done their research, researched the program, researched why that program is going to be a really good fit for them, why that institution is going to be a really good fit for them, and can really demonstrate that in their application. People who are chosen for Fulbright Awards are also leaders, and are kind of able to demonstrate that leadership, and will have examples of that leadership. They're also looking for students who are going to, go to the US and be a representative from the UK while they are in the US. And then once they return to the UK, they are going to share their experience in the US with people here in the UK and be a leader here in the UK. And you will see that if you look at Fulbright alumni, they are leaders all over the world. And so those are things to keep in mind if you decide to apply for a Fulbright Award and as you put together your application. And as I say, I'm sure that any webinars that the Fulbright Awards team has coming up will be able to answer that question in much more detail for you. And the last question that I see here for now, if I am applying for an external funding source, such as a Fulbright Award linked to a particular US institution, is it expected that this be mentioned in the personal statement or study plan? And so I think you mean I'm just double reading the question again. So I think you mean in your application to this university, do you have to mention that you've, for instance, applied to a Fulbright Award or to another award? And if they haven't specifically asked you to include that, then I don't think you do need to include that. If they ask it as part of the application, obviously you'll want to answer truthfully. But if not, then I don't think that it is expected that you mention that in there. I think US universities expect that people will be applying for all sorts of different funding options to help fund their studies, and don't necessarily need to know all the different ones that are being applied to. I mean, that being said, if you've already been awarded some funding, I suppose you may want to include that to show that you've received some competitive funding. And another question has come in. Whilst applying for the Fulbright Award, would you recommend us do a separate application to our chosen universities or wait until we have received our outcome of the Fulbright application? So you will need to be applying to US universities alongside the time that you're applying to the Fulbright Award, because the US university application deadlines are going to be happening kind of along that same timeline. And so you will not know if you have received a Fulbright Award until after the US university application deadlines have passed. So if you're choosing to apply for a Fulbright Award, you'll apply for that. And then at the same time, you'll also be applying to US universities. And so make sure that you are getting those applications in as well. All right, so I think that those are all the questions that have come in. So with that, I would like to thank you all again for tuning in this evening. And as I said, I will be sending the recording of the session out to all of you, the link to the recording over email. And if you do think of any other questions, then please do not hesitate to reach out to us by email or by phone or by signing up for one of those virtual advising appointments. So thank you all for tuning in this evening, and I hope that you have a good night. Bye.